Compliments. Today we're going to talk about complimenting your children. Can you imagine trying to raise a plant without water? Would you go out and buy a dog and bring it home and not ever plan on feeding the animal? You would never do that. Well, in the same fashion, you should never contemplate raising children without complimenting them. Now, I know some right now are going, whoa, I can't even fathom raising a child without complimenting them. That doesn't make any sense at all. Hold on, I've got some advice for you as well. But for some, you're not familiar with complimenting children because you weren't taught this. You were not given a good example from your parents. For whatever reasons, they did not compliment you. It wasn't part of your family biosphere. And so compliments don't come easier. They don't come at all. And you don't even think about it. You don't even approach life in that direction. But I'm going to build a small case for you that you need to compliment your children. Others are not even conscious of this. They've never even thought about this topic. Now that they're facing parenting, they're like, well, I need to consider this, but I've just never consciously thought about that. There's others that their self-esteem and their self-worth is so low, they can't imagine trying to compliment anybody. And in times past when they have complimented, their compliments seem to be very ineffective. So how could I really build anybody else up? Especially, let's say there's a parent that feels like they're weak and ineffective and like, I can't really, my compliments won't help my child. Just like plants need water, those are fake plants, by the way. They don't really need water. But just like real plants need water, children have to have parental approval. They thirst for it. It is so deep-seated that we understand that it's there, but we don't even know all the parameters of why it's there, except maybe that God infused that into us. But a child has to have it, and this should be absolutely known when it comes to orphans, those that are growing up in orphanages, those who have been through the government's system, those that have been adopted. And you should see that some of those children, when they become adults or when they get into their older teen years, are so dissatisfied with not knowing who their birth parents are that they do everything possible to seek them out. Even though people warn like this might not go well, your parent didn't want you then, maybe they don't want you now. So many of these birth children that are looking for their birth parents, so many of them are really disappointed after meeting them. But there is something in the child that just has to have parental approval, and there's no better way to give that than to actually be complimenting the child. Now, let's say you have really low self-esteem or you're just trying to figure out how to really compliment a child in a way, in a fashion that works. Well, it really helps for the compliment to be truthful. Now, some people try to enhance a child's life by teaching them all about Santa Claus and building up these huge myths and fairy tales. And, I want to give the child something magical to sink their teeth into. And then later it's like, it's just a letdown. The same thing is true with a compliment to a child that is not truthful. We forget that children are still very in touch with their emotions. Now, this can get beat and battered and abused out of children where they can lose contact with their emotions. But I figure that as a parent, you probably care about your child, especially since you're watching videos like this. And so if you care about your child that much, then you are looking for a true way to compliment this child. But the child growing up in that environment is at least going to have some emotional health to them, and they are going to quickly see through any kind of falsehood because they're still in touch with their emotions and they can feel truth as much as they can comprehend it intellectually. So it is much more nutritious to fill a child. What words was that? Cut that out. In your mind, I'm not editing this, but you cut it out. So what is the most nutritious compliment? Those that are true, that are just grounded in truth, and your child can feel that and it resonates with them. And what this does is it builds the child up. Like if I really sat down and just wanted to do this, I could sit down and go through my history and list the compliments that came from people and could probably tell you where I was standing, when I was standing, who said it. And you can go through and list these compliments and be like, wow, each of those was like a growth moment. So when we're complimenting a child with truth, those are growth moments for the child. And something else that it does is it establishes more impact for the child later. Think about a person that you barely know, someone that comes up and compliments you and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that compliment to come from this direction or from you in particular. And so the next time we're around them, how much more eager are we to listen to whatever they have to say, compliment or not? So the child that is complimenting a child is preparing the soil for future compliments. The child's actually going to be with anticipation, expecting compliments. Now, here is where discretion comes in. There's a very fine line in the sand. If you dropped out of the video at this point and just go off and compliment your kids, you can actually compliment your child to death. You can actually compliment your child's character to death. You can actually compliment the success of their life to death by giving the wrong type of compliments. I see parents make this mistake over and over again where they compliment the skills and the abilities of the child, not the character or the capacity or the attitude of the child. I've seen many fathers are proud, like, did you see my son's shooting technique? I mean, that's just amazing. Now, God gives us all different abilities and talents, and some of us are just given gifts that the rest of us do not have. If you want a quick example, I usually go to the concept of singing. Some of us have voices, some of us don't. Some of us are 7 foot tall and can play basketball better than those of us that are 5 foot tall, unless the person is incredibly gifted in muscle, eye-hand coordination and speed. But all things are not fair when it comes to competitiveness. We're lined up to be complementary to each other, not necessarily competitive with each other. So anyhow, a lot of times parents begin to compliment skills and abilities that were just handed to a child that the child has done nothing to grow in. They were just given that. So if a child is just born with eye-hand coordination and the parent brags on that to an extent, great, you can brag on that. But to continue to brag on the child's eye-hand coordination when it's not growing, it's not increasing, and the child is just nonchalantly playing baseball, and he's a superstar because, he has that gift and everybody around him is a flunky. But to just keep complimenting the skill and the ability sets this child up for failure because the parent is not looking deep enough and complimenting the character of the child, the energy of the child, the enthusiasm of the child, the want to of the child, the discipline of the child. You have to look deeper. And if you begin to just compliment a child based off of their skills or abilities, and you just keep complimenting that and complimenting that and complimenting that, you eventually build a vain child that has exceeded everybody else. And because of such, now you're their sycophant, and you have to continue to bring them praise and adoration. And if you don't please them, they will just move along without you. True story. So it is best that our compliments are true if you really see a child striving to increase their skill, compliment the striving. If you see someone that has a talent and they are multiplying the talent, compliment the work ethic, but don't just compliment skills and abilities. The same could be said of a child's look or appearance. Obviously, children come in all shapes and sizes and beauty ranges. And this being the case, children do need approval and affirmation to a point. But if a parent is not careful to compliment the child's being as important versus their physical representation as important, you're going to end up creating a child that is so incredibly vain and narcissistic that they are going to be hard for anyone else to even work with. Now, so complimenting a child in such fashion is great as long as we are not replacing our need to honor, glorify, and compliment and offer up praise to God Almighty. Now, see, I see all kinds of parents make this mistake. Because a parent is not devoted in their spiritual walk, because they are not fully divested into growing a relationship with Christ and God and expressing glory for the marvelous and amazing things He's done, they're void in their life and they're not producing an outflow of positivity like they should, so they look for somebody to heap this upon. And if you take God's praise and pour it into a child, God's not going to be mocked. It says, whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. You take the praise, glory, and honor and admiration that was supposed to be to God, and you force that into a child, you're going to create a child that thinks they are God, and that relationship between you and the child is not going to go well. Now, let's say some of you are struggling with, I don't really know if my kid, can do it. I don't, this child is incredibly limited in capacity. I don't really know how to be truthful in my complimenting. Well, you need to know a few things about children and how adaptive they are. For one thing, every single day, there are children out there that succeed in things that their parents told them they could not succeed in, and it's to prove the parent wrong. It's actually a reverse form of approval seeking. You prove the parent wrong to get their approval, which is weird and strange, but this is the way we as human beings act. Also, I wish I should have had this lady's name, but anyway, her dad basically decided to flush typical schooling down the drain. He said, I'm going to raise a genius. And so he basically began to feed his child all sorts of high-end information, all of this advanced learning. Had this child, instead of reading, second grade curriculum, he had this child reading through the Encyclopedia Britannica, etc. And would it surprise you to learn that this kid had an off-the-charts intelligence rating just because it was trained in such fashion? What I'm saying is there's children that overcome adversity. There's those that are trained for greatness and they become great. And you might not know this, but JFK was actually raised to be president of the United States. JFK's dad, when his older brother died, his dad's like, I was raising him to be president of the United States. That didn't work. So now not only do I believe my first son could have done it, my second son will do it. And you now know that JFK was president of the United States. So you can believe in your children. They can do it. If you don't compliment your children, someone else is going to. You were actually created to have a very special, and beautifully dynamic relationship with your children where you are giving them all of your wisdom, all of your input, direction, energy, not to the point of making them godlike. I'm talking about in proper balance of life, but you are investing in them, and there should be some sweet interaction between you and this flourishing plant of a child, but you might not get that if you don't praise and compliment them. Someone else can easily step into the equation where you have not fulfilled that deep longing that we can't quite explain, and somebody else can step in and go, hey, I think you're doing great at this, and they can steal that deep relationship away from you that you should have been enjoying. So how do we put this into place? Well, just throwing this challenge out there, why don't you compliment your child daily? Now, look for something real, something to do with the character, something to do with their attitude, etc. But just look for one thing a day. Just look for one thing a day. And if you are like I am, how many times have I failed at that challenge? So what I would encourage you to do then is also to incorporate into your life complimenting everyone around you. Compliment your wife, compliment your boss, compliment your employees, compliment your neighbors, compliment the person with the new car, compliment the person that came to work on time, compliment the cashier for checking you out speedily. If you will be one who compliments, then it will flow forth from your character, and then you will absolutely be able to nourish your child with positive words that they so desperately long for. Put this into place immediately.